Hello YouTube, welcome back to my channel. In today's video we are down on the floor in my temperate greenhouse where I am trying a new area for growing my sphagnum moss. So I brought a few trays in here of it, and it's been in here over the winter. So we're in summer now, so it's been in here for 6 months or so. And anyways, I just wanted to kind of give an update on how it's doing in here. So it's inside my temperate greenhouse, sitting on the bottom shelf, and so we're right basically on the floor. It's very shaded down here due to the sort of makeshift foundation I have along here, like the wood stuff. It's bright, but it's very shaded. Any watering from above usually ends up hitting these trays. They stay pretty moist, although it was a pretty warm afternoon and they're a little bit dry. But I will say, compared to the stuff I was growing outside, here in British Columbia in the summer, we have ultra low humidity for most of the time in the summertime. And anyways, yeah, it's doing so well inside the temperate greenhouse. I grow it in my Highland greenhouse as well, in pots. But it's growing in leaps and bounds out here. So I just wanted to go over a few tips and tricks for sort of keeping this stuff alive. As you can tell, these colonies, they're not, I harvest from them quite a bit. Pretty much weekly I can take out of these guys, and I can just pull off the tops of the moss like so, and underneath will grow back. And I can take stuff like this here, and yeah, it will grow back for me from that spot. And I can use this in other places and do other things with it and that sort of thing. In the beginning, when I was growing moss, I did try to keep it very, very clean, and I think that was a mistake. Being these trays were outside, I get the odd weed in it, and I used to be meticulous at pulling out the weeds and stuff, but I don't even do that so much anymore. You can see from being outside, I get a little bit of grass in it and that sort of thing, but really overall, I just sort of leave it. And so in here, it does have higher humidity than outside. It makes it a whole lot easier to grow if you have higher humidity. I'm finding it grows quite dense, and even just the old stuff like here, where I've taken from in the last few weeks, will start to grow back again very easily in the temperate greenhouse. So, but one of the things I did start doing with it is I did start hitting it up with Maxi fertilizer when I thought about it. Not tons. But, you know, I hit it up once every month or once every couple months when I sort of think about it, when I have some pre-made and pre-mixed, and yeah, have it ready to go. So I'm just pulling out another tray here, sliding it along. I love the look of sphagnum moss. It looks awesome. There's a grassy clump in it, but if you ignore the grassy clump, lots of good moss there. And so this greenhouse on the upper shelves gets hot. It's a very sunny greenhouse. Temperatures in here can be 35 Celsius in the daytime, like 90 plus sort of Fahrenheit. But down on the bottom, it is a little bit cooler, but it still does get hot down here. But as long as it stays moist, we're good. I was finding outside when I was growing it in direct sun, which was probably a mistake, but it just dried so fast. I had to water all the time, and I ended up with burnt tips. So in here, I don't get burnt tips, and I'm actually able to grow it a lot faster than I was. So this stuff is easy to grow once you sort of get the hang of it, but I really had trouble with it at first. It was like kind of, it was harder to grow than the carnivorous plants I was growing it for. I would always put it in my pot and then lose it. And I do find when I'm growing in my lowland area of my bigger greenhouse, it doesn't last. It's just too hot, and it just has to dry out sort of one time. When being hot, it doesn't seem to recover. But growing Highland, where there's extra humidity and cooler temperatures, it does good in there. I do grow it outside as well, and have grown it outside for years, and it does okay outside. So as long as you're not trying to grow it lowland, you should be okay. As for multiplying it, you could do it. There's so many ways you could multiply this stuff. Basically just chop it up and lay it out over some dead sphagnum moss, and it would start to grow, because that's essentially all this is. When I harvest some like this, I usually just try to pull off the growing tips, and I harvest it quite frequently, so it's not super thick. But when I harvest it like that, right, there's some nice stuff, and I always try to keep the tip sort of oriented upwards. I don't like to mix it up, just for repotting it. I will leave this sort of hole here, and that will be green again in a few weeks or a month. And then I kind of leave it like this, and then I can just stick that just directly into a pot, and that way everything is sticking up. If you're trying to grow this in another pot of sphagnum moss, that's pretty easy, because you can just pretty much lay it on top. If you're growing it in peat moss, it's a little more tedious, and you almost want to bury it a little bit, so the bottom half, which is pretty much dead anyways, if it doesn't see the light, it dies. Although it's dead, but it's not sterile or sterilized, so it would come back. But I buried a little bit deeper, so just the heads are sort of sticking out of like a peat moss bog. And lately, I don't know if it's just the spores from being around, because I have it growing everywhere, I've been having to pull it out of some of my Nepenthe pots from little Nepenthes, because it's just been overtaking them. And if you watch my last video that I did on the pygmy sundews, which are over here, I'm just going to walk you over here. You can check out that video. But this stuff here, if we can focus in on it, is sphagnum moss that I literally weed out of here. That's growing just from the peat moss itself. I don't know if I had a batch of unsterilized peat or what, but it seems like for the last year or so, even my pots of peat moss just start growing more sphagnum moss. So in the wintertime, this does get little heads on it, little capsules of spores, and maybe it just multiplies that way. It's kind of neat to see. But yeah, so to recap, my biggest mistake was with the moss was keeping it with not enough nutrients. The little bits of muck in there is great. Pine needles, sticks, stuff like that, all breaking down, really does help with a little bit of the nutrients in there. The Maxi really helped. Being in the greenhouse as opposed to outside, just that extra little bit of humidity really did help as well. I don't think I'd be successful growing this in like Sarracenia pots in full sun unless it was like really, really moist. But again, if you take the heads of it and sort of bury them into the peat moss, they would wick the water up, and then it works pretty good. So I will quickly go out and I will show you my bog pots and some of the stuff growing in my greenhouse as well, just to give you an idea of what it grows like in other places. Okay, here we are in front of my bog pots, which I have redone in the last little while. You can actually currently see, just as coincidence, down there at the back, the dripper is running right now, and every night it gets a flood like this and pours out of selected holes. But this moss is always, the peat is always really wet. So I don't have it sitting in a tray, but it does get this nightly watering here. So you can see this sphagnum moss growing in the sun. It's a lot harder to get it growing and looking nice. The heads are very, very tight together. And I took it at first and did bury it down a little bit into the moss. It looks a little bit brown because the tannins from the peat come up and actually brown it a little bit. And this one, I don't know if there's any sphagnum in that one. There's another little cluster over here as well. So I could very easily do this whole area in the sphagnum peat or in the sphagnum moss as well. But I redid it again, like I said last year, and opened it up again. So you can see the water pouring in from this one too. And it's not always this wet. It's just a coincidence that it is, the water is on right now. It will drip out and be, the water level, the water table is about 4 inches down. So, but it always stays wet like that. So outside has a very different look. This is in direct sun. Let's see if we can get a close up again. I find this is the hardest moss to grow, is the stuff in direct sun. It doesn't multiply very fast, and it stays super tight. So moss outside, obviously compared to the temperate greenhouse, it freezes solid, and that's okay too. So let's move on to the greenhouse, the Highland greenhouse. So here in the Highland greenhouse, I really have limited the moss growth because it was taking over all these little guys like you see here. So I left it in some of the bigger pots, like this one here has it still. That's my Edwardsiana. It's becoming quite a good size to it, so you can see there. And I love the look of it in there, but the plant has to be sort of a big enough size for it. So in this greenhouse, it's pretty easy care as well. Here's a nice little patch of it just sort of growing here. This little spot's been growing here for years. It doesn't multiply nearly as fast as in the temperate greenhouse. I'm not sure if it's just like not the big temperature swings or what, but it is growing sort of in all the pots around here. So again, it gets sprayed with some Maxi, which I really find is doing a great job with it. Just gives it that little extra boost of nutrients it needs. In here, it has nighttime lows of about 10 degrees or 50 Fahrenheit. And yeah, but I find it pretty easy. If you go down a shelf, I find it grows well in with my Utricularias. It grows really well down here. So these are net pots. And so this is more the scenario where the net pot has sphagnum like this one here. This is just not topped up. We got the dead sphagnum moss there, and then I just dropped the live sphagnum on top. All the heads oriented up as best I could, and yeah, it just grows from here. All my little pots there of it. It looks pretty cool. If it doesn't get as much light, it kind of gets gangly, but overall, at first I really struggled with sphagnum moss. It was much harder to grow than the plants, but once you get it down, it's not that hard at all. This one I just like ripped apart and harvested a bunch out of last week, so it kind of looks messy, but anyways, I hope you like this video. Here is a nice Utricularia with some sphagnum moss in. I hope you like this video, and if you want to see more videos like this, make sure you subscribe to my channel. As always, thanks for watching. Bye guys.